In section 5.3, problem number 23 asks us to find all of the values of all 6 trig functions using the unit circle for the given angle. And in 23 in particular, they give us the angle of 150 degrees. So if we draw that on this coordinate axis system, we see that that angle puts us in quadrant number 2. So that tells us right away that the x values are negative, but the y values are positive. And if you remember your special triangles from section 5.2 earlier in this chapter, you'll remember how to figure out the sides of this triangle. We know that it is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, and the radius is 1. So when the radius is 1 of a 30, 60, 90 triangle, we know that the shortest side has a length of 1/2, and the longest leg has a length of square root 3 over 2. Okay, so then in order to find the sine of 150 degrees, we want to take the y-coordinate over the radius. Well, the y-coordinate is 1/2 over the radius. Well, 1/2 over 1 is 1/2. Similarly, cosine is the x-coordinate over the radius. So square root of 3 over 2 is the x-coordinate, and the radius is 1. So we end up with the square root of 3 over 2. Tangent, we take the y-coordinate over the x-coordinate. So I have 1/2 over the square root of 3 over 2. Well, in this case, if you wanted, instead of using division of two fractions, you could turn it into multiplying by the reciprocal, and you would see that the 2's actually cancel each other out. So we end up with 1 over the square root of 3, and depending on how picky your teacher is, they may ask you to rationalize the denominator, which in this case would simply mean multiplying the top and the bottom by the square root of 3 so that your answer doesn't have a square root in the denominator. So you'd get the square root of 3 over 3. Well, once you've determined sine, cosine, and tangent, then your remaining 3 trig functions, you don't have to go through all of the work. You could just take the reciprocals of what you've already found. So for example, cosecant of 150 we know is the reciprocal of sine of 150 rather. So we had 1/2 here, we flip that upside down, and we find that cosecant is equal to 2. Here we have the square root of 3 over 2 for cosine, so then the secant must be 2 over the square root of 3, which again, if your teacher wants you to rationalize, you would multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3 so that you don't have a square root in the denominator. So we would end up with 2 times the square root of 3 all over 3. Finally, we've got cotangent of 150, which again is the reciprocal of tangent 150. I'm going to use this form of tangent of 150. When I take the reciprocal, I get the square root of 3 over 1, or just simply the square root of 3. Also in this section, problem number 33 asks us to find the values of all 6 trig functions for an angle, but instead of giving us the exact measurement of the angle, they give us a point that coordinates with the terminal side of the angle that we are interested in. So for problem 33, they gave us the point 1, -8, which we see is in the 4th quadrant. So that will make our x values positive and our y values negative. Now, in this particular case, if you're wanting to use the x, y formulas that we developed earlier, you will need to calculate what the radius of such a circle would be. So in this particular case, we can use the Pythagorean theorem for that. So x squared plus y squared equals r squared. Or you may have learned it as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's the same principle. So x squared, 1 squared, is 1. Y squared, -8, when I square that, gives me 64. And that is equal to r squared. So if I solve this for r, I find that r is the square root of 65. Okay, with that in mind, then, we can just go right through and find all of these trig function values. So, sine, again, is the the y coordinate over the radius. So, I've got negative 8 over the square root of 65. And I'll let you rationalize that denominator if that is something that your teacher requires. Cosine is the x-coordinate over the radius, so 1 over the square root of 65. Tangent is the ratio of y over x, so negative 8 over 1, which of course reduces down to negative 8. And now that I've done those three, my last three trig functions are all simply reciprocals of the first three. So if I reciprocate sine, I get negative square root 65 over 8. And if I reciprocate cosine, I get the square root of 65 over 1, which of course is just equal to the square root of 65. And if I reciprocate tangent, then I get negative 1 over 8. Also in section 5.3, we have problem 43, where the directions tell us to suppose that theta is in standard position and that the terminal side lies in the given quadrant. And then they will give you one function value for the angle theta, and they want you to determine what the other 5 trig function values would be. So for example, number 43 says cotangent of theta equals 1, and that you are in quadrant number 3. So recall that in quadrant number 3, you have x values and y values both being negative. So that's an important factor to keep in mind. Also in this particular case, if cotangent is equal to 1, then that tells you that x and y carry the same value. Okay, so x and y carry the same value. So, again, these can be done to different scales. You don't have to use the unit circle itself. So as long as you let x and y be the same value, let's say they're each equal to 1, then you can determine what r is equal to. So in this particular case, they would have to actually both technically be equal to negative 1, since we are in quadrant number 3. So this would be the point negative 1, negative 1. Well then, you use that same formula from the earlier problem, x squared plus y squared equals r squared. If x is negative 1 and y is negative 1, each of those squared equals positive 1. So then solving for r gives us the square root of 2. So then, sine is the y-coordinate over r. Well, the y-coordinate is negative 1, and r is the square root of 2. And again, you might need to rationalize that denominator if your instructor wants you to. Cosine is the x-coordinate over r, so the x-coordinate is negative 1, and r is the square root of 2. Tangent is the y-coordinate divided by the x-coordinate. Well, negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1. And this makes sense because tangent is equal to 1 is the reciprocal of what we were given, which was that cotangent is equal to 1. Alright, then for cosecant and secant, all we have to do is find the reciprocals of sine and cosine. And in this particular case, they are both equal to the negative square root of 2.